Imagine waiting day after day, really year after year, for news of someone you love serving overseas. You hold on to every little bit of information, every delayed postcard, only for the final news to arrive. And it reveals this tragedy that's almost too complex, too awful to comprehend. Today, we're diving deep into the life and ultimately the sacrifice of Major Arlie Higgins. His journey from being this dedicated teacher in Kansas to becoming a World War II prisoner of war, it really captures the heart joys, but also the quiet resilience of that whole generation. We've got a really fascinating stack of sources for this deep dive today. Things like local newspaper clippings, military records, historical accounts too. And they let us piece together Arlie's story, almost like a puzzle. It gives us this unique window into a really pivotal moment in history. So our mission here is to give you a kind of shortcut to understanding one person's really profound experience during the war, offering insights and maybe some aha moments that hopefully stick with you.
Yeah, and Arlie's story is just such a powerful example of how these individual lives become these incredibly potent lenses. They help us understand the huge human cost and, frankly, the complexities of global conflicts like World War II, especially in the Pacific Theater, which was just brutal.
Yeah.
His experience, it's not just another name on a list, right? It shows you the lived reality behind all those statistics.
Okay, so let's unpack this journey then. Arlie W. Higgins, born September 2nd, 1906, in America's City, Kansas. And it seems clear pretty early on he was really committed to education, not just for himself, but, for others too. He graduated from Kansas State College, that's in Manhattan, back in 1929. But that wasn't the end of it. He kept studying, worked towards a Master of Science degree in Educational Administration, also from Kansas State. He finished that in 1934, and get this, he did it by studying during his summer vacations.
Wow, that shows some serious dedication.
Right. And his thesis was titled, A Study of Compulsory Education in the State of Kansas. Speaks volumes, I think. His early career, we see him as a high school instructor in Ingalls, Kansas, then later as a high school principal in Florence, Kansas. He taught there for 3 years.
Looking at that educational path, getting the master's degree, it gives us this kind of unique insight into the personal ambitions people had. Ambitions that were suddenly just put on hold, or in cases like Arlie's, tragically never resumed because of the war. It wasn't just about learning. It was building a career, a future, even during tough economic times back then. It really underscores the individual cost of the war, far beyond just, the battlefield casualties, its lost potential, unfulfilled dreams.
And beyond the classroom, Arlie also had this commitment to national service developing. He was in the Reserve Officers Corps, ROTC, during college. That program trained future military leaders. And he kept his membership active even after graduating. We also see him serving as a lieutenant in the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC camps, first Burlington, then Scammon, Kansas, around 1936.
That involvement in ROTC and the CCC, it's not just a small detail. It's actually pretty critical for understanding that generation, right on the edge of World War II. These programs taught discipline, leadership skills. They created this vital pool of trained officers like Arlie, who were basically ready to go when the nation called. It sort of quietly prepared a generation, giving guys like Arlie skills that would soon be desperately needed, though, well, nobody could really imagine the scale of what was coming.
But that dedication to service would soon demand a much bigger commitment. As tensions were rising globally, the National Defense Program started reshaping lives all over America. And in November 1940, Arlie, who was still the high school principal in Florence, was suddenly called to active duty. His initial assignment was as a captain, 3rd Infantry, at Fort Crook, Nebraska. He moved there with his wife, Vanita Grace Shade. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Walter Shade, they were from Kansas City, Kansas.
And this wasn't just him, Host. His call-up was part of this huge national mobilization. Reserve officers like Arlie were being activated all across the country as the U.S. started seriously bracing for war. What's really striking is just how fast it happened. One minute he's a principal in Kansas, the next he's Captain Higgins preparing for war.
Yeah, quite the shift.
By July 1941, he was stationed down at Camp Leonard Wood, Missouri. And the sources even give us this fascinating little detail, almost mundane, Captain Higgins and another officer used to make these 60-mile weekend trips from camp. Their wives had rented a cabin together at the Lake of the Ozarks, and they'd share cars to go see them.
Wow, trying to hold on to some normalcy.
Exactly, a little glimpse of trying to maintain life amidst this rapidly changing world.
But that glimpse was pretty short-lived. October 1941, he gets back from maneuvers in Louisiana, and he immediately telegraphs his mother, Mrs. W.H. Higgins, Agent News. He's being sent to the Philippines, right away. He asked her to meet him in Kansas City, basically for a final goodbye.
And they would have known, of course. But he was about to be thrown right into the opening brutal phase of the Pacific War.
His deployment was immediate, wasn't it?
Yeah, immediate. To the Philippines, just weeks, literally weeks, before the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor and the Philippines itself. It places him right at the absolute heart of the opening moves of the war in the Pacific. It's really hard to overstate how precarious his position was, along with thousands of other American servicemen sent there just as everything exploded.
So, after the war actually started, his mother did get some word, indirectly. Around December 22nd, 1941, the news was that Captain Higgins had made it through that first chaotic Japanese attack on Manila without injury. He had apparently been sent to an island, the name wasn't given in the reports, about 400 miles from Manila. And his wife, Vanita, she was staying with her parents back in Kansas City. She also got some reassuring news through another officer's wife, saying both Arlie and that officer were okay.
These early messages, indirect like that, they really highlight the communication nightmare of the time. For families, news wasn't just slow. It was often fragmented, filtered through other people, sometimes deliberately vague for, security reasons. So every little word, every rumor, it became this desperate lifeline in just an ocean of uncertainty. Loved ones were just trying to piece together hope from these incomplete puzzles.
Then, as the war dragged on and the Philippines fell, Arlie's situation changed drastically. By June 1942, we find out he'd been promoted to major.
Which sounds like good news.
Right, but it was quickly overshadowed. His mother, Mrs. Hester Higgins, learned in August 1942 that Major Higgins was now a prisoner of war. And at that point, they hadn't had any direct word from him since February 1942. That's almost 6 months of silence. His wife, Vanita, she was down in San Antonio, Texas, probably facing that same dread. But what stood out to people who knew them was Mrs. Higgins's courage. Friends really admired her because she just never lost hope that her son was alive.
Her hope, is completely understandable, but it existed against this truly horrific backdrop. The surrender of Allied forces, first on Bataan in April 42, then Corregidor in May, that led to tens of thousands of U.S. and Filipino soldiers becoming prisoners. It was a start, just a brutal, brutal chapter. And while Major Higgins' specific unit wasn't on Bataan, his experience absolutely mirrors that wider POW crisis. It's a story of incredible suffering.
So what exactly was his role in those early days, the defense?
Okay, so Major Higgins served in the 101st Philippine Division, specifically the 101st Infantry Regiment. Now, this was a unit made up mostly of Filipino soldiers, but led by American officers like Higgins. A really critical force, though often overlooked, tasked with defending Mindanao, one of the big southern islands. Initially, he was the senior instructor for the 3rd Battalion. Later, he commanded the 2nd Battalion, which was positioned in a place called Aroman, so he was right in the thick of the fighting. Involved in desperate battles like Digos and Davao City, trying to hold back overwhelming Japanese forces. He was fighting pretty much constantly from December 41 through April 42, delaying those Japanese advances. And our sources even note he was wounded during that campaign. It was this prolonged, awful combat that led to the fall of the Philippines and his capture.
We hear about the terrible conditions in Japanese POW camps. Our sources let us see that Major Higgins, this man who was an educator, personally endured military prison number 2 at Davao. What did that mean specifically for him and the others there?
For Major Higgins and, thousands like him, the conditions were just beyond dire. The sources paint a grim picture. These camps had grossly insufficient food. Malnutrition, even starvation was rampant. Medical care, virtually non-existent. Overcrowding was severe, men packed into squalid conditions, which meant diseases spread like wildfire. And then, crucially, there was the harsh, often just inhumane treatment by their Japanese captors.
Just brutal.
We know Higgins was interned specifically at military prison number 2 in Davao, and it's a stark reminder that even the highest-ranking American POW, General Jonathan Wainwright, suffered through multiple camps. Formosa, eventually Manchuria, enduring that same systemic brutality. These weren't just prisons. They were places designed really to break the human spirit.
But even in those terrible circumstances, sometimes these little glimmers of hope managed to get through to the families back home. Major Higgins did manage to send a few messages, though they were incredibly delayed. The first direct word finally came in September 1943. That's nearly 2 years after he was deployed. It was a card, probably sent via the Red Cross to his wife Anita. It just said he was in good health.
Imagine getting that. Such a fragile lifeline, right? A fleeting confirmation of life amidst all that fear and unknown.
Absolutely.
These really sparse messages, arriving months, sometimes years late. They were more than just updates. They were often the only tangible link between the living and those presumed lost. For families like the Higginses, each card, no matter how brief, was this desperate, fleeting proof of life, even while they knew the full truth of his situation was still hidden. Think about that emotional roller coaster months of silence, then one line saying, "I'm okay," then back into that terrifying unknown again.
Then, in March 1944, his mother got another card. This one was actually written on a Japanese postcard, sent through the International Red Cross from Military Prison Number 2, Davao. Again, just stating he was well. This was the third card the family had received, each one just a tiny beacon. And the Red Cross, they kept up their huge, often frustrating efforts. They even made message forms available for families in November 44 so they could try sending messages to the prisoners in the Philippines. But despite these continued delayed updates saying he was okay, the story takes this devastating turn. His wife, Vanita, had heard from other sources around January 1945 that he was in good health. She believed he'd actually been moved north from Davao, but then a final card arrived in Kansas City. She got it after she returned from a visit to Seneca. It had no date, but again, it just said he was well and hadn't been moved yet.
Creating this awful dissonance, right? A message of deceptive calm arriving after the reality had already happened.
Exactly.
And this just highlights that agonizing uncertainty, the cruel delay in information that was so tragically common in the Pacific War. Unknown to his family, this horrific event had already occurred months before that last card arrived. What's profoundly disturbing here is that Major Higgins was among thousands of POWs transported on what were chillingly called hell ships.
Hell ships.
Yeah. Japanese transport vessels used to move prisoners. Conditions aboard were unspeakable, often unmarked, making them tragic but legitimate targets for Allied submarines. Inside, prisoners were packed beyond capacity, often without enough food or water. Just horrific.
And Major Higgins was on one of these ships when tragedy struck.
He was. He was one of somewhere between 4,775 and 1,782 prisoners of war aboard the Japanese transport ship Ersan Maru. It sailed from Manila on October 11, 1944, heading for Japan. But just 13 days later, October 24, 1944, the ship was sunk. Tragically by a U.S. submarine in the South China Sea. It happened over 200 miles from the China coast during a convoy attack in the Bashi Strait.
Sunk by friendly fire.
In effect, yes. A tragedy layered on tragedy. A devastating consequence of the fog of war, where even your own side could unknowingly inflict such a terrible blow.
The loss of life from that one sinking is just staggering. Only 9 prisoners survived. It resulted in one of the largest losses of American lives in a single maritime incident in all of World War II. Somewhere around 1,772 or 1,773 POWs died. Major Higgins' official date of death is listed as October 24th, 1944. And our sources also mentioned 2 other names, pharmacist's mate Emmett Gregory Stuve and Seaman Willard Windsor. They lost their lives at the same time, same place, sharing that awful fate.
The official word, the confirmation of Major Higgins' death, didn't actually reach his family until June 1945. Imagine the shock in his hometown, Seneca. The War Department informed his wife, Vanita, and then she had the task of bringing that news to his mother, Mrs. W.H. Higgins.
Oh, devastated.
After years of his mother holding on to that pure faith, that courage, believing her son was alive and would come home, imagine that moment. Years clinging to hope, to every sparse word, only for the final confirmation of loss to arrive months and months after the event itself. It's really a testament to the hope families held on to, even in the darkest times, but also just the crushing finality of war.
Major Arlie W. Higgins' life cut short at just 38, but it was clearly one of profound dedication to education first and foremost, then to his country and always to his family, from being a Kansas academic, a principal, to becoming this courageous officer in that desperate defense of the Philippines. His story really is a microcosm of the immense personal sacrifice during that global war. It's a testament to the thousands whose lives were just irrevocably changed or tragically ended.
And this really brings up an important question for us, doesn't it? How do we as a society make sure these individual stories within these huge conflicts are never lost? How do we ensure they remain more than just, entries in a history book? Major Higgins isn't forgotten. He received the Purple Heart for his wound. He's memorialized on the Tablets of the Missing at the Manila American Cemetery in the Philippines. And he was given special recognition back at Kansas State College in the All-Faith Chapel they built to remember alumni and former students who served. These aren't just names on a wall, They're echoes of lives lived, sacrifices made.
So thinking about all this, what does it mean for you listening right now? What does it mean for a community, for a family, to wait years for news only to finally get this tragic confirmation tied to something so unforeseen, like the sinking of a prison ship by friendly forces in the confusion of war? And maybe more broadly, How do individual stories like Arlie's really illuminate the human cost of conflict? How do they force us to look beyond the sheer numbers and remember the lives, the dreams, the quiet heroism behind them?